Hi everyone, thanks for making time to watch my presentation on feedback in the selection process, and let's jump right in. I want to start by asking you a couple of questions. Think back to your last interview. Do you remember if they gave you feedback on how you did in the interview process? Would their feedback have changed how you interviewed in the future? Reflecting back on my last interview, I didn't get feedback on my interview process. If I think back to all of my interviews, the only feedback I received was, "Congratulations, we'd like to offer you a position at insert company name here." I didn't often get feedback as to why I was hired or why I wasn't. As a cohort, we talked about being ghosted by schools. We didn't hear back from the schools we weren't accepted into. In my experience, the same can be said about the interviewing process. On the left, you could see in this basic selection process that we start with an interested applicant. The organization reviews their resume. After that, there may be a phone interview, multiple in-person interviews, a reference check, and a background check. If the organization feels the process has gone well up until this point, they'll make the applicant an offer. But as you can see, we don't have feedback in this process at all. As a field, we've studied the benefits of giving and receiving feedback within the organization, whether that's between supervisor and subordinate or using a 360 feedback approach. We've studied feedback environment, feedback orientation, and so on. Most organizations also have a process for firing employees that often includes some type of feedback. You're being let go because you've been late every day for the past month. Or, while your performance has been excellent, we have to let you go due to the financial crisis we find our organization in. But we often don't give feedback before joining an organization. We would like to offer you a position based on your uncanny ability to do A, B, and C, which are very important to our company. Or, we regret to inform you that we have moved on with the other applicants due to their expertise in X, Y, and Z. So naturally, I had some questions that I wanted to look into while diving into this feedback and selection research. So for my first question, do organizations give feedback to applicants? Are we alone in the fact that we haven't received much feedback in our interviewing and selection process? Rosario and colleagues asked hiring members if their organization, or if they themselves, provided detailed feedback to all interview applicants regardless of whether the applicant requested feedback on their performance at the interview or not. Here were the answers they found. As you can see, most hiring members reported only sometimes giving detailed feedback, never giving detailed feedback to all the applicants, or weren't sure. It looks like we're not the only ones who didn't get detailed feedback as applicants. My follow-up question was then, could feedback be useful in the recruitment and selection process? Maybe we're not using feedback because it's not useful and no one wants it. Going back to Rosario and colleagues' study, they found that applicants, whether successful or not in the interview process, would want constructive feedback. They also found that applicants who did not receive constructive feedback were the ones who wanted the interview process to change more so than the applicants who did not receive feedback. Furthermore, applicants who were not successful in the interviewing process were not provided with as much feedback compared to those who were successful. Applicants seem to see 7 critical aspects to the employee selection process. You'll notice that constructive feedback made the list. So it looks like applicants want constructive feedback. But what about the hiring members on the organization side? From the hiring member perspective, there are 5 critical aspects of the employee selection process. They also see providing applicant feedback as a critical aspect. So now we know that we don't often get feedback in the interview process, but we generally think it's important, and we, especially as applicants, want detailed or constructive feedback. So what if we get feedback but it's delayed? Does it matter when applicants receive their feedback? A study looking at the recruitment and selection practices of public sector higher education institutions in Ghana found that one of the top challenges people report having in their recruitment and selection process is delayed feedback. So why might a delay in feedback be a problem? Think back to an interview where you didn't hear back for weeks and then finally were offered the position. Were you anxious for weeks? Did you ever think, why did they wait so long to offer me the job? Were there better candidates that turned down the position? Where was I on their list? It's natural for candidates to have anxious thoughts and feelings while waiting for a decision to be made, and it can create these uncomfortable interpretations of the process when there's a large delay between when the candidate interviewed and when they were accepted. The last question I'll cover for this PowerPoint will be, do some people in the workforce think we should use feedback in the selection process? In a lot of our classes, we talked about the gap between the practical world and the academic world. What is the applied world doing when it comes to using feedback in the selection process? Some companies believe that giving feedback to candidates can help the image of their organization, might encourage candidates to reapply to their organization in the future because of their positive experience, and candidates might share their positive experience with others. They also consider asking candidates to give feedback to the organization on the selection process. Feedback can help supplement the statistics we find in this process. Say there's a large drop-off point during a specific stage of the interview process. Supplemented by candidates' feedback, we might be able to identify whether it's an issue with a specific interviewer or if it's an interview question that is successfully filtering candidates out. With this additional information, companies can work on improving their selection process. In a perfect world, every employee would know how to give constructive feedback. Whether it's to their coworker, supervisor, subordinate, or applicant who would really like some constructive feedback, it would do well for all of us to learn how to do it. LinkedIn suggested 6 general steps in how to best deliver on this cry for help. Take a moment to look at the 6. Would you agree with all of their steps? Would you add, remove, or change any? So maybe we should think about introducing feedback into this process. However, as with everything we study in this field, there are some things we should consider before charging down the streets, demanding that organizations change their process. First, we should consider feedback content. The feedback we use within an organization might be different than what we'd use for those who are currently outside of the organization. What is appropriate feedback? What's useful feedback? What about the applicant's reaction to our feedback? For example, depending on how we word the reason why the applicant didn't get the position, it could result in a variety of reactions. Would you rather hear that your low test performance was the reason you didn't get the job, or that your just below required performance was the reason. I know you wouldn't want to hear either, but does one cause a stronger negative reaction than the other? Second, while some organizations are supporting the idea that they should be getting feedback during the process, is this a practical suggestion? Would companies collect it throughout the process, right after the full interview is done? It's easy to imagine that getting feedback before the applicant receives the final decision could be very different if collected after they receive the final decision, especially if they didn't get the job. Third, why would organizations push back on this idea? Do companies believe that by giving constructive feedback to rejected candidates, they're helping the competitors? Will they scoff at the increased time commitment this would require from their organization? What benefit does it bring to their company? And at what cost? Fourth, what about the applicants who don't want or won't use feedback? Should we consider a hybrid approach in which applicants are told if they would like feedback, please reach out to the organization? There are so many more questions we could look into when it comes to feedback in the selection process. However, I'd like to quickly recap the questions we were able to briefly and generally cover in this presentation. My first question was, do organizations give feedback to applicants? It looks like giving feedback to applicants after the interview isn't a common practice among organizations. Question 2. Could feedback be useful in the recruitment and selection process? Well, applicants want constructive feedback. To see whether it's useful or not would require us to give people feedback after the interview process and see if A, applicants find it useful, and B, whether following interviews show improvement based on the feedback. The third question I looked at was, does it matter when applicants receive their feedback? The answer? Applicants find delayed feedback to be one of the biggest challenges in the selection process, and it can cause unpleasant feelings for the applicants, even the successful ones. So it would seem that it does matter. Last but not least, do some people in the workforce think we should use feedback in the selection process? It looks like there's been talk on the pros of providing feedback to applicants and how to provide that feedback. We even saw some pros for giving organizations feedback on the interviewing process. Again, thanks for your time, and I hope you're all staying healthy and staying safe. If you have any questions, you know where to reach me.